Welcome back. I am John P. Today we are going to be talking about whether or not micro brand watches are worth it. I received this question in many different forms on my Instagram, The Real John P, where you can find me and a little bit about what I do behind the scenes at Delray Watch and other places. But nonetheless, I get this question asked in so many different ways. Hey, is this micro brand worth it? Is that micro brand worth it? And I think it's very important that we cover this because today there are so many micro brands out there, and I'm receiving this question increasingly, which means people really must want my opinion on this. So I'm going to be sharing this with you, how micro brands work, how the makers of these micro brands typically launch the brand, and also maybe whether or not it's worth it to you as a watch collector. On the wrist today, I have Rolex Oyster Perpetual OP39 Red Grape. I love wearing this watch. I think it just fits so perfectly, and I'm kind of disappointed that Rolex discontinued the OP in the 39 size for favor of going to the larger size and the smaller size. I thought the 39 just fit everyone so well. What do you think about that? Comments below. Also, please don't forget to check out DelrayWatch.com. So microbrand watches, what are they? Microbrand watches generally can be referred to as any watch that's made by a smaller or lesser known company that produces very small batches of watches and typically does not produce the watches themselves. Now, not all of that has to be true all of the time. I think that to get a very accurate definition of micro brand can be difficult currently because the watch market is quickly changing, and something like FP Journe, which is an independent watch manufacturer, could have technically used to been considered a micro brand. Now they've kind of matured and have gone almost mainstream blue chip, at least in the watch collecting community. So I think there's these really gray areas, but generally if we're talking about micro brand, these watches tend to be on a little bit more affordable side, and they tend to use off-the-shelf parts and components, though with some customization. So that's kind of what a micro brand is. Now, many of you are going to leave in the comments below, what do you think about Norqain? What do you think about Manta? To give you an example, these are a couple. What do you think about Talker? What do you think about, Lane or something like that? Maybe in the future I'll cover each individual one specifically, but I think it's very important to note that when we're talking about micro brand watches, a lot of these watches, if not most of these watches, are coming from the same few manufacturers. So when someone goes out to start a micro brand watch company, a Swiss micro brand watch company, not everyone is like building a workshop in the mountains or something like that in Switzerland. Not everyone is going over there and putting together a workshop and assembling watchmakers and all of that. No. It doesn't happen like that. Generally what happens is you might go there, you might not, but there are contract manufacturers, and the same contract manufacturers are also producing watches, not all the watches, but they're producing some watches from brands that you would know and recognize on the market that people would not consider to be a boutique or micro brand watches. They're producing the watches, or they might be assembling some of the watches. They might be helping in designing the watches or the movements. And this is something that is very common since the earliest days of Swiss watches. This is something, the sharing of watchmakers and techniques and ideas and parts is something as age-old as watches. It was more apparent and evident and very clear and transparent when watches were just a precision instrument. But now when it's all about the allure and the luxury and the glitz and the glamour, these things kind of are masqueraded in a sense, right? The Swiss really take pride in what they do, including making the watches. So there's a little bit of secrecy, but if you do the footwork or you listen to a video like this, you can see that, yes, when someone starts a micro brand, they usually work with a manufacturer. Maybe they really want to get crazy with it, they'll lease some watchmakers, but typically you approach a couple of these manufacturers and they help you do it from A to Z and everything in between. For the most part, you can have them be as hands-on as you want or not. And so when you do that, you have many options, right? Think of all the parts and the brands and the manufacturers. There's endless possibilities, and then you start making unique designs and tooling. So they have these houses that do this and they handle it for you. They handle all the brands, and that's just how it works. So when we take a look at this and we're considering, are micro brands worth it, right? That's the question we're trying to answer here. It really comes down to, do you like the brand? Do you believe in what they stand for? And do they stand behind their products, right? Because if we're talking about watches where they're kind of being produced by a handful of manufacturers, maybe a little bit more than that, but they're all putting in some level of standard of quality. You look online, you read the reviews, there's really nothing overwhelmingly negative. You can rest assured that it's going to have some baseline level of quality. If people are buying the watch and they're not displeased at scale, then there's something decent or good that they're doing. And at that point, it really comes down to branding. And that's a lot of what Microbrands really don't have to offer, in my opinion, compared to their larger competitors, right? Think of something like a Rolex. You don't even have to know that this is a Rolex to look at it and say, yeah, that's a Rolex. It looks like a Rolex. That's how strong the branding is. You look at other brands, very much the same. You can recognize an Omega Seamaster or a Speedmaster, but you might not recognize a Manta, for example. And I'm not saying anything negative about Manta because I think they do a pretty decent job. But what I'm saying is, you really need, as a watch collector, to buy into what they're offering. The story, or maybe it's the customer service, or maybe it's the way that they handle issues, right? There's probably going to be issues. All watches have issues that come up, whether it's the functionality or something with the dial or the case. Something will happen. There's moving parts. These are items. They strive to reach perfection, but perfection is not possible in the world, right? Or at least they say. So when someone asks me, is it worth it? I like to respond, do you like the brand? Is it worth it to you? Some people want to speculate. They want to say, hey, I want to buy this Ming watch that I think is going to double in price and I'll make a little bit of money. In which case, it's not whether it's worth it, it's whether it's worth it to you because you wanted to sell the watch for more. So that was your initiative, that was your priority. Whereas someone looking to maybe buy a nice watch they can wear for decades or even a few years, that's going to have a little bit of a different conversation than, hey, will this watch appreciate in value? And we've seen things with certain brands and Microbrands where the brands have been around a while, they didn't really catch on, right? Look at Ming. When it first came out, they had a little bit of buzz, but there wasn't really a big demand for it right away. Now there seems to be sellouts and things like that. The same could be said for Chrono Tokyo, or the Chrono lineup from Hajime Asaoka. Now they're very hot, even so hot as to the brand trying to hold people back and select the type of buyer that they want to buy the watch because it's in such high demand. But when it came out, a lot of people were like, yeah, this is just kind of a bland watch. Now people love it. And there was no crystal or magic ball that could really, tell and predict that would happen. So I say this and I reiterate this all the time, but it's all about individual circumstance and whether or not it's worth it to you. Now, if we're talking about truly looking at it from an objective standpoint, looking at the specs of the watch, I think many Microbrands coming in at that $2,000 and under price point offer a really great watch for what it is, and sometimes even a watch that would be selling for double from one of the manufacturers like an IWC or something from a Richemont or a Kering Group, just because they don't have that marketing budget, right? They don't have the distribution channels. They're selling direct to consumer. They lower their overhead, their expenses. That makes a bigger margin for them, and they can be ultra competitive based on the price. So if we're talking about specs, look at the specs. I think if you see a Microbrand watch that you like the design, I think that's where it starts, right? Like the design, like what you're actually buying into. Look at the specs. Most manufacturers, or brands I should say, will have the specs on their website, and compare it to some of the larger brands. And I think some people might be shocked to see how close, if not better, a Microbrand could be than compared to something that's out there in the market for double the price. So look at the specs, make it 1-to-1, and if the specs are there in other watches that you know, love, respect, and wear, I don't see why not pull the trigger, as long as you can look past the fact that in terms of the branding, it's a bit of a gamble, so like what you're getting into. And that's what it boils down. Once again, like what you buy or buy what you like, and then you'll always be happy. But what do you guys think? What Microbrands do you love? Have you had any great experiences with Microbrands, or maybe some that are not so great? I would love to hear it and see it in the comments below. And please do not forget to check me out on Instagram, TheRealJohnP, and DelReyWatch.com. Thanks, guys. You've been chatting with John P. Ciao.